The moment you walked away, heaven went silent. Not because God was absent, not because his power had diminished, not because his authority had weakened, but because your choice was so heavy, so deliberate, so charged with consequence that even the unseen realm paused to witness it. You did not merely drift. You did not simply stumble. You turned your back while knowing the weight of what you were leaving behind, and that moment echoed beyond time. Many think God speaks only when people obey, but there are moments when God grows quiet, not in weakness, but in gravity. Silence in that hour was not confusion. It was the stillness of eternity, watching a soul step away from destiny. You must understand this. Your life has never been ordinary. You were not shaped by accident, and your days were never random. From the beginning, there was intention breathing over you. Every breath you have taken has been sustained by God's mercy. Even when your heart wandered, even when your faith trembled, even when your hands released what once held you steady, God has never been surprised by your strength, but neither has he been shocked by your rebellion. What left heaven silent was not that you failed, but that you knew who God was, felt his nearness, tasted his goodness, and still chose distance. That kind of decision carries a spiritual weight most people never touch. There are people who sin in ignorance, and there are people who fall in weakness. But then there are those who walk away with their eyes open, those who leave after they have seen, those who turn after they have heard, those who withdraw after they have been carried. And when that happens, the atmosphere shifts. Not because God loses control, but because love, when rejected knowingly, pauses. Love does not scream when it is refused, it stands still. God does not chase in panic, he waits in authority. He allows the silence to teach what noise never could. You thought you were walking away from pressure. You believed you were escaping expectations. You told yourself you needed air, space, freedom, but what you actually stepped away from was alignment. You didn't lose God. God remained whole. You lost positioning. And when positioning is lost, clarity fades, strength weakens, and the world suddenly grows louder than it ever was before. The chaos you felt afterward was not punishment, it was dislocation. A soul out of alignment always feels heavier than a soul under command. Hear this with sobriety. God does not beg for attention. God does not compete with distractions. God does not negotiate with divided loyalty. When you turned away, God did not collapse into grief the way humans do. He remained God. He remained sovereign. He remained complete. But heaven took note, because when someone who carries calling chooses comfort over obedience, the spiritual realm recognizes the cost before the person ever does. You assumed leaving would make life simpler, but complexity followed you. You expected peace, yet rest eluded you. You told yourself you were finally choosing yourself, yet you felt more fragmented than ever. That is because purpose is not a burden, it is a stabilizer. Calling is not pressure, it is structure. When God places his hand on a life, he is not restricting it, he is anchoring it. Remove the anchor, and the drift feels like freedom at first, but storms expose what was once holding you steady. God was not speechless because he lacked words. God was silent because you needed to hear your own soul without his covering voice. There are moments when divine silence becomes the loudest sermon a person will ever experience. In that quiet, insecurities rise, illusions collapse, and the false strength you borrowed from distraction runs dry. Silence reveals what applause never could. You did not break God's heart the way people break one another's hearts. You challenged something far more serious. You challenged divine patience. And patience does not respond impulsively. It waits, it watches, it measures. God is never rushed by emotion. He is governed by purpose. And purpose was never canceled when you walked away. It was paused, not erased, deferred, not destroyed, waiting, not dead. Do not misunderstand this pause as abandonment. God does not abandon what he has marked, but neither does he force what must be chosen. Love that is coerced is not love. Obedience that is manipulated is not obedience. God desires alignment that comes from surrender, not fear. And so when you left, heaven did not chase you down. It let you feel the weight of separation so that return, if it came, would be genuine. You are not first to underestimate what it means to step away from God. Many have done it before you. Some never came back, not because God refused them, but because pride convinced them they were fine without him. Others returned broken, humbled, stripped of illusion, and finally ready to listen. The difference was never God's willingness. The difference was always the heart. Right now, something inside you knows this is true. You feel it tightening in your chest. You sense it in the unease you've been calling restlessness. That is not guilt. That is recognition. Your spirit remembers alignment even when your mind resists it. Your soul remembers weightlessness even while your body carries heaviness. God has not been absent from your life. He has been waiting at the edge of your will. You may tell yourself that God understands, that God is compassionate, that God is merciful, and all of that is true. But do not mistake mercy for indifference. Mercy does not mean God shrugs at your departure. Mercy means God does not destroy you for it. Mercy means time is still being extended. Mercy means the door has not been sealed. But mercy also means accountability is real. Every step away shapes you. Every delay costs you something unseen. You left, and in doing so, you exposed the difference between knowing about God and walking with God. Knowledge does not sustain in storms. Presence does. Familiarity with words does not carry you through fire. Alignment does. You discovered that inspiration without obedience fades quickly, and conviction without surrender collapses under pressure. These are lessons silence teaches better than sermons ever could. God's silence was not rejection. It was an invitation to reflect, to reckon, to return changed rather than unchanged. Heaven is not impressed by dramatic exits or emotional promises. Heaven responds to humility, and humility is not saying you are wrong. It is turning back without excuses. Even now, you are not too far. Distance does not intimidate God. Time does not weaken God's reach. Failure does not erase God's authority over your life. But understand this clearly, return is not casual. You cannot come back carrying the same posture that led you away. God does not restore on old terms. Restoration requires surrender deeper than the level you once resisted. What you felt when you left was relief. What you feel now is exposure. Relief fades quickly. Exposure lasts until truth is faced. God is not waiting to shame you. God is waiting for you to stop pretending you were stronger without Him. Because the moment you admit that, silence breaks. Not with condemnation, but with direction. This pause in your life is not wasted time. It is a crossroads. One path leads to continued drift, dressed up as independence. The other leads back to alignment that demands humility but restores strength. God will not shout which path to take. He will let the weight of each choice speak for itself. And deep down, you already know which one carries life. You left and heaven went quiet. Not because God was done speaking, but because you needed to finally hear the truth echoing inside your own soul. When you stepped away, you thought you were choosing autonomy, but what you were really choosing was exposure. Under God's covering, even weakness is protected. Outside of alignment, even strength becomes fragile. God never designed you to live by self-generated power. Your breath itself is alone sustained by mercy. Every pulse of life is evidence that independence was never the plan. Dependence on God was. And when you walked away, you didn't suddenly become free. You became vulnerable to forces you were never meant to wrestle alone. There is a truth few are willing to face. Distance from God does not immediately destroy a person. It slowly distorts them. First, clarity blurs, then convictions soften, then compromises feel reasonable. Then what once shocked you begins to feel normal. God's silence during this process is not approval. It is restraint. It is patience refusing to interfere with the lessons your own choices must teach. God will let you walk far enough to realize that the road you chose cannot carry the weight of your soul. You may have noticed how noise increased after you left. More opinions, more confusion, more internal debate. That is because when God's voice is no longer the loudest, everything else rushes in to compete. Without divine direction, urgency replaces wisdom. Emotion replaces discernment. Desire replaces discipline. God's guidance does not just tell you what to do, it filters what you hear. Remove that filter, and life becomes a storm of competing demands that drains you faster than you ever expected. Do not underestimate the seriousness of what you walked away from. God does not casually invest Himself in a life. When He draws near, it is because He sees capacity. Capacity to carry responsibility, to influence others, to steward truth. Walking away from God is never just personal. There are unseen ripples, assignments delayed, people left uncovered, moments missed. This is not condemnation, it is reality. Destiny is interconnected. When one life steps out of alignment, others feel the effect even if they cannot name it. Yet even now, God's authority over your life has not been revoked. Authority is not granted by your obedience. It originates in God's sovereignty. But the flow of power, the clarity of direction, the ease of purpose, those require alignment. God does not withdraw His nature, but He will withhold His backing from a direction He never authorized. That is why some of your efforts felt heavy. You were pushing without divine endorsement. God is not impressed by how far you went. Distance does not intimidate omnipresence. What matters is posture. A single moment of humility outweighs years of stubborn wandering. The moment your heart softens, the silence you feared begins to thin. God's voice does not return with flattery. It returns with truth. Not to coddle, but to recalibrate. Not to soothe ego, but to restore order. You must understand that return does not mean regression. God does not bring you back to who you were before you left. He brings you back changed, wiser, less arrogant, more anchored. The fire you once carried without understanding now burns with discernment. The confidence that once leaned on emotion now rests on surrender. God wastes nothing, not even your wandering, but He will not allow you to glorify it. There is a dangerous lie circulating in many hearts, that God is flexible about alignment as long as intentions are good. Intentions do not override order. Sincerity does not replace obedience. God is compassionate, but He is not casual. He is patient, but He is not permissive. When He calls, He expects response. When He reveals truth, He expects movement. Delay is not neutral. It is a decision dressed as caution. God's silence was not a void. It was a mirror. In that quiet, you saw what truly motivated you. You saw where fear lived. You saw how much approval mattered. You saw how quickly comfort became a priority. These revelations were not meant to shame you. They were meant to strip illusions. God cannot build on what is false. He waits until the foundation is honest. Some of you listening know exactly what moment marked the turning point. A decision you justified, a boundary you crossed, a conviction you muted. You didn't fall suddenly, you slid gradually. God watched every step, not with rage, but with sorrowful CL, arity, and still mercy held. Still life continued. Still breath remained. That alone should tell you something. Judgment did not rush because grace was still working. But grace is not infinite permission. It is finite opportunity. There comes a point when silence becomes a question, and that question demands an answer. Will you continue to define freedom as distance, or will you finally admit that alignment is where strength lives? God will not answer that for you. He has already made His position clear. He is God whether you return or not. The choice determines who you become, not who He is. Return does not require dramatic displays. It requires surrender without negotiation. Not promises of future obedience, but present yielding. Not explanations, but submission. God does not need you to convince Him. He needs you to stop convincing yourself that you are fine without Him. The moment that illusion collapses, the path forward becomes visible. And make no mistake, when you return, responsibility returns with it. Calling does not shrink because you left. If anything, it grows heavier because now you know what misalignment costs. God entrusts more to those who understand consequence. The next chapter will demand more precision, more humility, more dependence than the last. This is not punishment. It is preparation. You were never meant to be carried by excitement alone. You were meant to be anchored by truth. God is not rebuilding you to make you feel good. He is realigning you to make you effective. Comfort was never the goal. Purpose was, and purpose only flows where God is honored as God, not consulted, not suggested, but obeyed. The silence you experienced was not the end of conversation. It was the space before decision. God is still God. His authority is unchanged. His mercy is still extended. But the next move is not His, it is yours. There is a moment God waits for, not because He lacks initiative, but because sovereignty honors choice. God can interrupt St. Orms, but He will not override will. You were created with the terrifying dignity of decision. That is why your departure mattered, not because God was threatened, but because your will was exercised against alignment. Heaven respects will even when it grieves over where that will leads. And that is why silence followed, not as absence, but as respect for the seriousness of your choice. You have to recognize how rare it is for a person to even notice God's silence. Many leave and never feel it. They drown it with distraction, ambition, pleasure, noise, but you felt it. That means something in you is still awake. A conscience that has not fully calcified. A spirit that still remembers weight and glory. God's silence only troubles those who once walked close enough to recognize the difference. Indifference is louder than rebellion, and you were never indifferent. What unsettled you most was not hardship, it was meaninglessness. You discovered that success without alignment feels hollow. That progress without purpose feels exhausting. You could still move, still achieve, still survive, but something essential was missing. That missing element was not motivation, it was authorization. When God authorizes a path, there is a strength that exceeds effort. When God is removed, even talent becomes tiring. God never designed you to constantly prove yourself. Striving is a symptom of misalignment. Under God's direction, effort multiplies. Outside of it, effort evaporates. That is why you felt like you were pushing doors that barely moved. You were not cursed, you were unauthorized. And God will not empower what He did not initiate, no matter how sincere the desire. Understand this deeply. God's patience should never be mistaken for passivity. Silence is not inactivity. While you were questioning, God was weighing. While you were justifying, God was discerning. While you were deciding whether return was worth the cost, God was determining whether you were ready to carry what company mess next. God is more concerned with who you are becoming than how quickly you come back. You learn something in the distance that closeness never taught you. The cost of pride. Pride always disguises itself as self-respect. It tells you that you deserve ease, that boundaries are unnecessary, that obedience is optional, but pride cannot sustain you. It collapses under pressure and leaves you defending choices that no longer satisfy you. God resists pride not out of anger, but because pride cannot coexist with dependence, and dependence is the soil where purpose grows. There is a sacred fear you touched, not terror, but awareness. The awareness that life is not a game. That alignment matters. That choices echo beyond emotion. That God is not a concept to be adjusted, but a reality to be honored. This awareness is not meant to drive you away. It is meant to sober you. God does not want you reckless with your soul. God's call was never about controlling your behavior. It was about posit, owning your life. When God leads, He leads toward clarity, toward fruit that lasts, toward impact that outlives emotion. When you stepped away, you did not escape rules, you entered confusion. And confusion is always more demanding than obedience. You may have thought God's expectations were heavy, but now you see that misalignment is heavier. Obedience requires discipline, but disobedience demands explanation, justification, and repair. One builds quietly, the other exhausts loudly. God's way is not easy, but it is simple. Your way felt simple at first, but it grew complicated quickly. God does not shame returnees. He examines them, not to reject, but to refine. You cannot come back the same and expect a different outcome. God is not interested in restoring your comfort. He is restoring your clarity. The next alignment will not be emotional. It will be intentional. You will not be led by impulse, but by conviction. God is not reintroducing you to fire. He is teaching you how to carry ice without burning yourself. There are levels of trust God gives only to those who have learned the cost of walking without Him. You are being prepared for responsibility, not relief. God trusts those who understand silence because they no longer mistake noise for guidance. They have learned to wait, to listen, to move only when direction is clear. Do not rush this moment. Rushing is what led you away the first time. God is not in a hurry. Eternity is not threatened by your timeline. What matters is depths. God would rather slow you down than let you advance misaligned. Speed without direction is dangerous, no matter how confident it feels. Even now, God is not asking for performance. He is asking for surrender. Not a speech, not a vow, not a dramatic gesture, just a yielded heart that stops arguing with truth. God already knows what you can do. He is waiting to see whether you will finally let him lead without conditions. And this is where the weight of silence begins to shift. Not because God changes, but because you do. When resistance softens, clarity returns. When pride loosens its grip, direction sharpens. God has not been withholding himself. He has been waiting for alignment to make his voice effective again. You left, and heaven grew quiet, not to punish you, but to confront you with the reality that life without God's guidance is louder, harder, and emptier than you were ever meant to endure. There is a reason God allows you to feel the weight of return before you feel the relief of it. Weight clarifies motives. If you come back only because you are tired, you will leave again when strength returns. But if you come back because you recognize truth, alignment will hold even when the path is narrow. God is not interested in temporary remorse. He is shaping permanent resolve. He is not restoring emotion. He is restoring order. You learned something vital while you were away, that you cannot outrun design. You can delay it, resist it, ignore it, but you cannot replace it. God's design for your life is not a suggestion you can improve upon. It is a structure that supports who you truly are. When you step outside of it, life doesn't fall apart immediately. It simply stops making sense. Purpose is the interpreter of suffering. Remove it, and even blessings feel confusing. God never lost sight of you, but you lost sight of him. And in that loss, you discovered how quickly perspective shifts when the eternal is no longer centered. Temporary things began to feel urgent. Urgent things began to feel essential. Essential things were neglected. This is what happens when God is moved from the center to the margins. Life does not collapse, it distorts, and distortion is more dangerous than destruction because it convinces you that something is working when it is slowly breaking you down. God's silence trained you to discern rather than demand. Before, you wanted answers. Now you understand the value of wisdom. Answers satisfy curiosity. Wisdom reshapes character. God is far more interested in who you are becoming than in what you want to know. Silence was not withholding. It was instruction without words. It taught you restraint. It taught you humility. It taught you that not every discomfort needs an immediate escape. You must stop measuring God's nearness by how you feel. Feelings fluctuate, truth stands. God was no less present when you felt distant than when you felt inspired. Presence is not proven by emotion, it is anchored in sovereignty. God does not move in and out of your life based on your consistency. He remains God at all times. What changes is your awareness, your sensitivity, your alignment. You now know the danger of treating God as a resource instead of authority. When God becomes someone you consult rather than someone you submit to, confusion follows. Guidance turns optional. Conviction turns negotiable. Direction turns selective. God does not share authority. He does not compete for position. He reigns or he is resisted, but he is never partially God. There is a maturity being formed in you that could not have been produced any other way. Comfort never teaches discernment. Ease never develops endurance. God is not cruel for allowing distance. He is wise for using it. What you learned in silence will protect you in seasons of influence. Those who have never been quieted often mistake noise for power. You will not. God is preparing you to move with weight, not impulse. To speak with authority, not volume. To stand firm without needing approval. The world is full of people who act quickly and collapse under pressure. God is shaping you to endure, to carry responsibility without losing humility, to walk in clarity without arrogance. Do not romanticize your departure, but do not despise it either. It exposed what needed correction. It stripped false confidence. It revealed dependence you refused to admit. God allowed it not to define you, but to refine you. And refinement always hurts less than repetition. If you learn now, you will not have to relearn later at a higher cost. The most dangerous thing you could do at this moment is return halfway. Partial surrender produces constant tension. God does not dwell comfortably where loyalty is divided. Half alignment is more exhausting than resistance because it requires you to constantly justify why you are close but not committed. God is calling you past that place, past excuses, past fear, past the need to control outcomes. You are realizing that obedience is not about restriction, it is about trust. Trust that God sees what you cannot. Trust that timing matters. Trust that waiting is not wasting. God's perspective is eternal. Yours is momentary. When you align with Him, you borrow eternity's clarity for today's decisions. God is not asking you to rebuild what you lost. He is asking you to release it. Some things cannot be carried into the next alignment. Certain habits, certain mindsets, certain attachments were only sustained in distance. They will not survive return, and that is intentional. God is not subtracting joy, He is removing weight. As silence begins to lift, you may feel exposed rather than comforted. That is normal. Light does not soothe immediately, it reveals. God reveals so He can heal accurately. He does not rush restoration because shallow healing leads to future collapse. What God restores, He fortifies. You are standing at a threshold where honesty matters more than confidence. God does not need you strong, He needs you yielded. Strength He can supply, direction He can give, but surrender cannot be outsourced. That choice belongs to you alone. Heaven was quiet when you left, not because God withdrew, but because the moment required gravity. And now that gravity is pressing you toward truth, toward alignment, toward a return. That is not emotional, not temporary, not conditional, but anchored in reverence, shaped by humility, and governed by the understanding that life only makes sense when God is honored as God. There comes a point when the soul can no longer pretend, when distraction loses its flavor, when excuses no longer quiet the inner knowing. That moment is sacred, even if it feels uncomfortable. God often brings you to the edge of yourself so that self-dependence finally collapses, not to humiliate you, but to free you. As long as you believe you can manage life on your own terms, surrender will always feel optional. But when you finally see the limits of your own control, alignment stops feeling like a demand and starts feeling like mercy. You are beginning to understand that God's authority is not oppressive, it is stabilizing. Authority gives structure to chaos. It defines boundaries so life can flourish within them. Without it, everything becomes negotiable, including truth. God does not impose. Order to restrict joy, He establishes order so joy can survive. The freedom you sought outside of alignment was fragile because it had no foundation. Freedom anchored in God is weight-bearing. It holds under pressure. God does not rush you back with promises of ease. He draws you back with clarity, clarity about who He is, clarity about who you are not, clarity about the difference between confidence and surrender. Confidence says, I can handle this. Surrender says, God alone is sufficient. One relies on capacity, the other relies on sovereignty. God is not calling you to believe in yourself. He is calling you to trust Him without reservation. You are also learning that God's timing is not arbitrary. The delay you resented was not neglect, it was preparation. Had you returned too quickly, you would have brought the same patterns back with you. God was not delaying restoration, He was protecting it. Some things must fully lose their appeal before they lose their power. God allows appetite to die. So obedience does not feel like deprivation. There is a seriousness to this moment because God is not merely restoring relationship. He is recalibrating purpose. Purpose cannot be carried casually. It demands reverence. It demands discipline. It demands a heart that no longer treats alignment as convenient but as essential. God entrusts influence only to those who understand the weight of misalignment. You are being shaped into someone who will not abandon direction when emotion shifts. God is also teaching you the difference between being moved and being led. Being moved is emotional, being led is directional. Emotions fluctuate, direction remains steady. When you were distant, you were moved by impulse, reaction, and desire. Now, God is drawing you into a life governed by instruction rather than inclination. This kind of life feels quieter on the surface, but carries far greater power beneath. You may have noticed that your prayers are changing. They are less about outcomes and more about alignment, less about control and more about clarity. That shift did not happen by accident. It is the fruit of silence. Silence strips prayer of performance and leaves only honesty. God does not respond to eloquence, He responds to truth. When your heart speaks plainly, heaven listens attentively. God is not inviting you back into familiarity. Familiarity breeds casualness, and casualness erodes reverence. He is inviting you into intimacy marked by awe, awe that keeps you grounded, awe that keeps you listening, Awe that keeps you aware that God is not a companion to your plans, but the author of them. Awe restores the proper distance that allows true closeness. You are also learning that obedience is not a single decision. It is a posture, a daily yielding, a constant awareness that your life is not self-owned. God is not seeking moments of surrender. He is forming a surrendered life. That kind of life is not dramatic, but it is unshakable. It does not need constant reassurance because it rests on trust. God's silence refines your hearing. You will no longer mistake urgency for instruction or opportunity for permission. You have learned that not every open door is authorized and not every closed door is rejection. Discernment grows best in stillness. God used quiet to teach you how to recognize His direction without needing noise. This next season will require courage, not enthusiasm. Enthusiasm fades. Courage remains when obedience costs something. God is not asking you to feel ready. He is asking you to be willing. Willing to let go of control. Willing to move when it would be easier to stay. Willing to trust when outcomes are unclear. Faith is not certainty about results. It is confidence in God's nature. Do not fear the weight you feel now. Weight means significance. Responsibility always feels heavier than freedom until you realize it gives meaning to movement. God is not burdening you, He is grounding you. A grounded life is not easily shaken by circumstance or opinion. It stands because it knows who governs it. You left once thinking distance would protect you. Now you see that alignment is what preserves you. God's authority does not diminish you, it defines you. His direction does not erase your identity, it reveals it. And the silence that once unsettled you has done its work. It has stripped away illusion, quieted rebellion, and brought you to a place where truth no longer needs to shout to be heard. Heaven grew quiet when you left so that you could finally hear what had always been true. Life reaches its fullest weight, its deepest clarity, and its strongest purpose only when God is honored without conditions, trusted without negotiation, and followed without reserve. The moment stands before you, unadorned and unavoidable. Not dramatic, not loud, not emotional, but holy in its weight. This is the point where truth stops being something you admire and becomes something you must answer. God is not calling you to feel inspired. He is calling you to stand accountable, to look at your life without filters, without excuses, without rehearsed explanations, and to decide who governs it. Not who advises it, not who comforts it, who rules it. Examine the distance honestly, not to condemn yourself, but to understand it. Distance did not begin with rebellion, it began with neglect. Alignment was not lost in one moment, it eroded through small allowances. God is asking you to confront those moments, not with shame, but with clarity. What you tolerate shapes you, what you postpone weakens you, what you surrender restores you. This is your call to return with intention, not emotion. To walk toward God with reverence, not nostalgia. Not because you miss how things felt, but because you now understand what truth costs. God is not asking you to rebuild the past. He's inviting you to step into a life governed by surrender, anchored in humility, and strengthened by obedience that does not waver when comfort disappears. Do not wait for another sign. Clarity is already here. The unrest you feel is not confusion, it is conviction. God is near enough for you to respond, but distant enough to require choice. That is not cruelty, that is honor. God honors your will by refusing to coerce it. What you choose now will not only shape your direction, it will shape your depth. Let this be the moment you stop negotiating with truth. Let this be the moment you stop delaying obedience until conditions improve. Let this be the moment you decide that alignment is not something you fit into your life, but the foundation upon which everything else stands. God does not need your perfection. He requires your surrender. Walk closer, not because fear drives you, but because reverence steadies you. Renew purpose, not because life fell apart, but because you now see what truly holds it together. Live aligned, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly, faithfully, and without retreat. And may this truth remain etched within you long after every sound fades. Life does not gain meaning through control, success, or independence, but through a heart fully yielded to God, a will fully aligned with God, and a life that finally understands that nothing carries greater power, deeper peace, or truer freedom than walking in unwavering reverence before God.